The notorious streak event is going to start again in a few hours. It took some people almost 2 full weeks before they finally got the 5 wins for the last batch. So this time, let's try to make that a little bit faster, and here are some decks that could help you with that. First, I want to look at some A+ tier decks and explain their strengths and weaknesses, and after that there's 3 more S tier decks. Then it is up to you to decide what kind of deck you like the most for this event. First up is the Pikachu Raichu deck. This deck is a mix of Genetic Apex and Mythical Island cards. Just a quick rundown of the cards included are 2 Raichu, 2 Pikachu EX, 2 Zapdos EX, 2 Pikachu, 1 Dedenne, 2 Sabrina, 2 Lieutenant Surge, 1 Potion, 2 X-Speed, 2 Pokeballs and 2 Professor's Research. Alright, now that we have all this down, let's look at how the deck is played. In the most ideal situation, you will play Pikachu EX right away and fill up your bench with other Pokemon. Just attack as soon as you can, as hard as you can. It might be needed here to use your potions to keep the Pikachu healthy. Around the mid game, you should have the Raichu on your bench. Once the Pikachu EX seems to get low, it's just best to use X-Speed to get Raichu in play. Then when you also have Lieutenant Surge in your hand, use it to power up Raichu and one-hit KO the opponent's Pokemon. If you don't get Pikachu EX in your hand, in the early game you can also use Zapdos to poke down Pokemon. This deck is really good into water-type decks and is decent against anything else but Executor, EX decks or fighting-type decks. Another deck that includes cards from both Genetic Apex and Mythical Island is the Blaine deck. This deck card list includes 2 Vulpix, 2 Ninetales, 2 Ponyta, 2 Rapidash, 1 Magmar, 2 Blaine, 2 Potions, 2 X-Speed, 2 Pokeball, 1 Red Card, and 2 Professor's Research. In this deck, ideally you would start with a Ponyta or a Magmar as your active Pokemon, and put a Vulpix and or a Ponyta on the bench. Use your Professor's Research as often and as fast as you can. On your second turn you would ideally be evolving your bench Ponyta and Vulpix so that they can do huge damage. Use them to chip away damage from your opponent's Pokemon. The easiest way to finish off any of the opponent's Pokemon is with Ninetales. Make sure to provide it with sufficient energy and use Blaine whenever you see an opportunity to knock out Pokemon. Especially if that opponent's Pokemon is an EX card, since it will provide 2 points. This deck is extremely favorable against grass decks and it fares well against other decks except for Starmie EX decks. Speaking of the Starmie EX deck, this deck again includes cards from both sets. The deck list is as follows: 2 Staryu, 2 Starmie EX, 2 Articuno EX, 2 Vaporeon, 2 Eevee, 2 Misty, 1 Giovanni, 1 Sabrina, 2 Leaf, 2 Pokeball and 2 Professor's Research. On your first turn it's always beneficial to play Articuno EX as your attacking Pokemon and try ramp up with Misty card as fast as possible. Also make sure to have Eevee and Staryu benched, since you will want to evolve those as soon as you can. The next step is to keep on putting on pressure with either Starmie EX or Articuno EX, and to evolve the Eevee into a Vaporeon so you can use its ability to move around energy where needed. Leaf also comes into play here, as you can just retreat your Pokemon without the fear of losing a bunch of energy. After that, you can just move them around with Vaporeon again. The best decks to play into are Fire-type decks, while its worst matchup is the Pikachu EX deck. A variation of this deck is to play Articuno, with 2 Articuno EX, 2 Vaporeon, 2 Eevee, 2 Misty, 1 Sabrina, 2 Leaf, 2 Potions, 2 X-Speed, 2 Pokeballs and 2 Professor's Research. Next up, we're gonna talk about the Scolipede and Weezing deck. This deck consists of 2 Weezing, 2 Coughing, 2 Venipede, 2 Whirlipede and 2 Scolipede. 2 Koga, 2 Sabrina, 2 Leaf, 2 Pokeball, 2 Professor's Research. The early game strategy of this deck is to send Coughing into the front lines and keep a Venipede on the bench. You want to use Koffing's attack to find your other Koffing and your Pokeball and your Professor's Research to find another basic Pokemon, since those are necessary. Preferably, you want to use the Pokeballs before using Professor's Research, as that increases the chances of finding Whirlipede and Scolipede with the Professor. Now you want to evolve the Koffing and use its gas leak ability while in the meantime evolving all the way up to Scolipede. Once this Pokemon is ready, you want to play Koga to get rid of the Weezing and play the Scolipede to deal damage. The best matchup for this deck are Psychic decks like Mewtwo EX, etc., while the worst decks to play against are Fighting decks and the Pikachu EX decks. Now let's talk about the Celebi deck. I heard you like flipping coins, then this deck is definitely for you. This deck consists mostly of Mythical Island cards. Let's have a look at the card list. 2 Celebi EX, 2 Snivy, 2 Zerfine, 2 Superior, 1 Delmice, 2 Erica, 2 Sabrina, 1 Potion, 2 X-Speed, 2 Pokeball and 2 Professor's Research. I think most of us will know how to use this deck at this point, but just for the sake of it, let's go over it for a bit. In the early game, you will want to play Celebi as your active card, while you use your other drawing cards to look for the Superior Evolution line. As soon as you can, play Snivy on your bench and evolve it. All the while, try keep Celebi healthy with Potions and Erica. Lastly, once you have finally gotten your Superior, it is time to start killing Pokemon in one hit if you are lucky with the flips. The matchup for this deck is any fighting Pokemon, as of course they are weak to grass, while the worst thing you can run into is a Blaine Fire deck. Alright, so now let's get to the S tier decks. The first one is Mewtwo EX. The now already famous Mewtwo EX deck is our first contestant at this S tier, consisting of 2 Mewtwo EX, 2 Ralts, 2 Kirlia, 2 Gardevoir, 1 Mew EX, 2 Sabrina, 2 Mythical Slab, 1 Leaf, 1 Potion, 1 X-Speed, 2 Pokeball and 2 Professor's Research. What we would like in the early game is a Mew EX or a Mewtwo EX to be our active Pokemon, while we keep Ralts on the bench and start looking for its evolution line. Ideally, you will want to have Mew EX as your active Pokemon, since it will be able to deal some chip damage right away. After that, you will want to be looking at getting a Mewtwo in the active position, as you can keep dealing damage and get Gardevoir on your bench. Once you have reached this stage, you can also use Sabrina to switch out opponent's active Pokemon and one-shot some of the ones they have sitting on their bench. The best decks to play against with this deck are the Venusaur EX deck, as it struggles to keep up to the damage, while the worst matchup is the Arbok decks. The second S tier deck is the regular Pikachu EX deck. This one differs from the Raichu deck mentioned earlier in the video quite a bit. Let's go through the deck list. There is 2 Pikachu EX, 2 Zapdos EX, 2 Blitzel, 2 Substrika, 1 Electabuzz, 1 Giovanni, 2 Sabrina, 1 Blue, 1 Potion, 2 X-Speed, 2 Pokeball, 2 Professor's Research. On the first turn, you want to be starting with one of the deck's so-called effective attackers, which include Blitzel and Zapdos EX. These are both Pokemon that only require 1 energy to deal damage. You can also start with Pikachu EX, but it will very likely take some damage before you are able to attack with it. Use the potion to keep it healthy in that case. Next step is to keep your bench full and just switch out the attackers that are able to deal consistent damage. This will most likely be the Pikachu EX himself, but can also be the Zapdos, etc. Now just try to KO Pokemon where possible and use Giovanni where you can. It can also be very useful to use Blue to make sure your Pokemon can't get one-hit KO'd themselves, and use Sabrina to make the opponent switch out Pokemon you are able to one-hit. This deck is strong against any water type deck and slightly weak against fighting type or Blaine decks. The last deck I wanted to talk about is the Gyarados EX Greninja deck. This might be one of the strongest decks in the game right now. It requires the following cards: 2 Froakies, 2 Frogadier, 2 Greninja, 2 Magikarp, 2 Gyarados EX, 2 Druddigon, 2 Misty, 2 Leaf, 2 Pokeball, and 2 Professor's Research. This deck is all about dealing passive damage to soften up Pokemon, and then dealing the final blows with bigger attacks. You want to start this deck with using Druddigon as your active Pokemon, while having Froakie on your bench. Only put out Magikarp on your bench if you have a Gyarados for the next turn. If you are forced to start with a Magikarp as your active Pokemon, use its Leap Out ability to get it back to your bench as soon as possible. In the following turns, you will leave Druddigon in the active spot while you look for the evolution cards you need. Evolve Froakie into Frogadier and Greninja, and evolve Magikarp into Gyarados. Once you get a decent setup going, use Leaf Trainer to get Druddigon out of the active spot, while you get Gyarados into the active spot while you use Greninja to snipe out vulnerable Pokemon or put the enemy's Pokemon into one-hit KO range. This deck is really good against any fire decks and is slightly weak against electric type Pokemon like Substrika, as it will be able to snipe your Magikarp on the bench. So really do make sure your Magikarp cannot be sniped early. So these are all the decks you could be trying. Hopefully everyone is able to get all the badges in the event decently fast this time. And once you have the badge, you can still play matches and just surrender so other people can also get the badge.